Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Tyler Berry, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us as we present what we've worked on in our planning studio. Before we begin, I'd like to hand it over to the director of the Levin College Master of Urban Planning and Development Program, Dr. Joanna Ganning.
Thank you, Tyler. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending the Master of Urban Planning and Development studio presentation. As Tyler said, I'm Joanna Ganning, Associate Dean for the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs. I'm standing in for my boss, Dean Roland Anglin, who could not be here today, but as luck would have it, I'm also the program director, and so it is doubly my honor to speak with you today. The studio presentation is the culmination of years of work by these students, the end point typically for the master's degree. This year's studio presentation, Access AsiaTown, concludes a semester-long partnership with North Coast Commercial and the AIA Design for Aging Committee. While this year's client and project are unique, this is far from our first brush with Engaged Scholarship. Engaged Scholarship is a central value of Cleveland State and the Levin College. The Levin College's primary mission is the pursuit of excellence in teaching, research, and service through the active engagement in improving and creating opportunities for the citizens of the greater Cleveland region and the state of Ohio. The work you are about to hear is similarly reflective of the values of the Muppet program. A portion of our mission statement reads, through our curriculum, engaged activities, and faculty research, we generate innovative ideas that foster livable, equitable, vibrant, and sustainable futures, particularly for legacy cities. I believe we are about to hear some of those innovative ideas. Our programs could not scaffold and support this caliber of work without the excellent services provided by Levin faculty and staff and the ongoing support of our alumni, employers, collaborators, and friends. Thank you for your ongoing support and involvement with the Levin College of Urban Affairs. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over the floor to Dr. Tom Hildy, who co-taught this year's studio.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ganning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's great to see everyone. As Joanna said, my name is Tom Hildy, and I'm an assistant professor at the Levin College, and I want to welcome you to the final presentation for the Planning Studio, part of the Masters of Urban Planning and Development program. I am co-instructing this course this semester, and I wanted to provide some background on the role of this class in the program and its importance for the college. A master's program requires a lot of dedication and time and energy from students as they learn about the various aspects and demands of becoming a professional planner. So our studio class provides the opportunity for students to apply and integrate basically everything they've learned in the program into a final project. Most of our students are in their last semester of the program, and one of the most important features is that we have students work on a project for a real client in the Cleveland area. And this is a great opportunity to engage with the community, allow students to demonstrate their ideas and talents, while also providing a benefit to the organizations we work with and the broader community. This semester, our clients were North Coast Commercial and the AIA Design for Aging Committee. And I want to thank them so much for being highly engaged with the class throughout the semester. I also want to thank Midtown Cleveland, who provided the students with a lot of support while working on the project this semester. And I want to give this year's class special recognition for persevering through COVID-19, which is still ongoing and has really characterized the majority of a lot of these students' time in the program. We started the semester meeting remotely on Zoom, and then halfway through the semester, we started to meet in person on campus to better support the collaborative work that the students have been undertaking. And today we're back to Zoom for our final presentation. So I just wanted to commend the students for being incredibly adaptive and completing this ambitious project under the current circumstances. So I hope everyone enjoys today's presentation. And at this point, I will hand it over to my co-instructor and fearless leader, Jim Kostelik, to say a few things.
Thank you, Dr. Hildy. So in the first half of the semester, the students did extensive research and heard from several guest speakers who share their knowledge and expertise about certain components of the study. And we are extremely grateful for the time that they put in and came in and did some incredible work with the students during the semester. During the first phase, the students also compiled questions for a bilingual public survey and identified several stakeholders who would be interviewed for the project. And we also did a field trip to the area on a very cold winter day. After the first 8 weeks, the students presented their phase 1 report, and with no spring break this year, immediately began obtaining public input and formulating phase 2 of the project. Since this phase requires significant collaboration amongst the students and being divided into subgroups, that's why we felt it was important to get together back on campus. The students were led by a steering committee comprised of Rachel Remenschneider and Fulton Benya, and prepared a market analysis, design drawings, and plan recommendations for the area. In addition to the plan, the students also completed several other tasks, including developing graphics and maps, formulating a final report, preparing a summary presentation, which you're about to hear, and making all the arrangements for today's presentation. And finally, they are about to start a website for the project, which we will put all the information from tonight's presentation and the final document on. They did all this in 8 weeks, and so we're very proud, Dr. Hildy and I are very proud of all of them for all the time they put into this project over the last few weeks. So with that, I will turn it back to Tyler.
Thank you all. So for the last 16 weeks, our classes worked together to research, outline, and ultimately propose a plan for our site area. Our site area is located in AsiaTown, a neighborhood just east of downtown within the Midtown area. The specific study area is located in an area that encompasses from Interstate 90 on the Inner Belt to East 36, and from Payne Avenue south to Chester Avenue. In guiding our plans, we wanted to develop both a mission statement as well as a vision statement. For our mission statement, we wanted to celebrate AsiaTown as a cultural center to ensure that it is friendly, safe, and accessible for residents and visitors, to strengthen the identity of the neighborhood and enhance the sense of community, to increase prosperity for the businesses and residents of AsiaTown, and to provide residents the ability, both financially and through universal design infrastructure, to age in community. And for our vision statement, we envision AsiaTown as a community that is inclusive, connected, and accessible to all. It will be a multicultural destination with a unified neighborhood character throughout. AsiaTown will have efficient connections to nearby neighborhoods, as well as safe streets for pedestrians and vehicles traveling within AsiaTown. With universal design standards implemented throughout, it will be accessible for residents and visitors of all ages and abilities. We were specifically tasked with looking at the current situation for older residents. Many residents are of a higher age in the site, but are lacking options for proper residency, whether that be modifications to the current home or opportunities to live in the area in a more appropriate facility. Before planning, we took a toll of the existing conditions in the area. Beginning with the history of the site, I'm going to pass it off to Isabella McKnight.
So the history of Cleveland's AsiaTown is really a story of 4 different towns through history. So in 1880, the first Chinese and Japanese residents of Cleveland formed a community on West 3rd Street. In 1910, the community moved to Ontario Street between Lakeside and St. Clair, as that was where 2 large national Chinese membership organizations built local chapters. In 1930, Ontario's Chinatown was razed as part of an urban renewal project, and the community moved east to Rockwell and East 22nd, which today is the site of the historic Chinatown. And that community really prospered until the 1970s, when the city of Cleveland in general experienced decline, and residents began to relocate to the suburbs and also moved a little farther east to present-day AsiaTown. In 1991, Asia Plaza opened at Payne and East 30th Street, really cementing that move further into Midtown. And in 2006, as the Asian community really grew around Asia Plaza, the area was rebranded as AsiaTown.
Now discussing the neighborhood today is Ian Russell.
So the neighborhood today is an eclectic mix of different uses. We have semi-industry as well as residential and retail within the area. So we wanted to kind of look at the area within our site, which is that inner shape, and then also a walkable quarter-mile buffer of the site. Key takeaways were really that a lot of the assets for the AsiaTown neighborhood are located in that quarter-mile buffer, with few within our site area specifically. Along with that, there's a large number of restaurants, specialty food markets, as well as kind of neighborhood retail facilities in that area. Notable absences from the walkable area and the site are green space, recreation space, and then community gathering spaces.
Discussing proposed plans from other groups is Fulton Benya.
Thank you, Tyler. So these future proposals come from a Midtown Cleveland community engagement event in AsiaTown. And what is being proposed is a new multifamily residential development in the Dave's Grocery parking lot on the corner of Payne and East 36. They are also proposing a community parking plaza in the parking lot on the corner of Payne and East 33rd, as well as a mixed-use development to the west of Dave's across of East 33rd. And finally, there are discussions about future road improvements to implement a bike lane on Payne Avenue to make it safer.
Next, discussing the current community insights is Jamisha Alexander.
Thank you, Tyler. Hello, everyone. This is a short summary of the insights from the surveys that were previously conducted by the Midtown and AsiaTown Community Development Corporations. The goal was to combine this information with our team's online survey and compare input with the residents' feedback as far as the condition of the future conditions of their neighborhood, which includes some of the following: eliminating barriers to walking, biking, using public transportation, better streetscaping elements such as enhanced crosswalks, decorative planters, and seating along with multilingual banners and directional signage. Other interests include a multilingual public library, an incubator space for startup businesses and entrepreneurs, family-oriented restaurants, diversified and affordable housing options, community gathering spaces such as the example shown to the bottom right of Pington Park located in Chicago, Illinois. They also they also have interest in programs to teach arts and cultural appreciation that offers job training and other workforce preparation courses. Furthermore, residents also address the concerns of safety. Other key takeaways include elevating Asian and African American voices in the decision-making efforts, creating strategies that foster unity and celebrate cultural aspects of the community. They will also like art galleries to display the works of local artists, establish a better connection to the surrounding neighborhoods, a vivid color scheme to enhance the AsiaTown identity through murals and art in public spaces. Finally, residents will like a community services and hospitality ambassadors program, such as the Midtown, Ohio City and University Circle communities. The goal is to recognize the value of residential input. Our team came up with recommendations for strategies based on these results, as you will see in the upcoming slides.
Thanks, Jamisha. Now we need to look at the current land use and physical space. We can see from this figure block diagram of the site and the surrounding quarter-mile area that there's a wide variety in blocks in both layout size and orientation, and there's contrast in building size, creating a juxtaposition between small residential surrounded by large warehouse and office. Finally, there's a wide variety of vacant parcels as identified by the city, and even more open space being underutilized as empty parking. Now, to discuss zoning, we have residential surrounded by the semi-industry zone, which is supposed to abut retail. There are a few pockets of multifamily, but it's primarily two-family zoning, which allows for 2 dwelling units with permitting for up to 6 with approval. There's also local retail business along Payne and general retail on other corridors. Finally, just as the semi-industry is designed to abut retail, we have some residence industry, which is to control industry along residential uses. Finally, a land use map showcasing the current uses of the parcels in the site area. There's a lot of industrial and light industrial, as well as those large pink parcels that are classified as parking lot. Now, I'd like to pass it off to Malcolm Trier to discuss the environmental threats and concerns.
Thank you, Tyler. And thank you everyone for joining us. So I will go over our environmental analysis, which had 5 areas of focus. The first area of focus would be air pollution via the highway and vehicle emissions. Taking a look at the map, you'll see two buffers. First is the 500-foot highway buffer, which is the recommendation by the EPA, the US EPA. And the second is a more conservative recommendation from the Health Effects Institute, as well as the California Air Resources Board. So ways to kind of mitigate these issues would be strategic plantings of trees and shrubs along I-90 to kind of mitigate these concerns. The second environmental threat that's present in our analysis would be ground pollution via the former underground storage tanks that you'll see marked on the map as well. We've had 7 former tanks. 6 of them have been removed and have been deemed no further action. So it means there was no release of petroleum products. The 7th, though, at 2950 Payne Avenue, was deemed to have a release while it was in the ground, and it has entered into the Class C release program. And so that was something that will need to be cleaned up and cleared up, both financially and environmentally, to move on developing that parcel. Our third area of environmental focus would be impervious surfaces. This is basically just a general indicator of environmental urban health. Less is more. You'll see our study area is about 80% impervious, with areas like retail and industrial over 90%. Those are large swaths of parking lots and large buildings and very little tree plantings. So that's something we'll want to work on there. That'll be green space and green infrastructure as kind of strategies for that. So our fourth area of environmental analysis would be tree canopy coverage. And this is beneficial to the ecological benefits, the environmental, the social, the economic. You'll see the recommendations nationally and locally in the bottom right-hand corner. And sadly, our study area is currently far below those standards. Even using the urban neighborhood standard, ours falls over almost 16% below. And you'll see that it's also decreasing in canopy size and overall study area and almost all of the specific land uses as well. And so our final area of environmental analysis is public green space. As mentioned before, it is lacking in the quarter-mile buffer, but there is 2 smaller parks and public spaces within the half-mile buffer. So again, this will be something we want to focus on our plan.
Courtney Whitman is next to discuss the demographic findings for the area.
Thank you, Tyler. So I collected demographic data at the census tract level for the site. As you can see on the left, most of the population falls between that 20 to 29 range, with 20 to 24-year-old males making up about 15% of the population. The second most populous age group is between 55 and 69. Oh, if you want to go back 1 slide, sorry. Looking at the population by race, we can see that a little over 40% is white, about 25% is Black or African American, and 25% is Asian. While there is only Asian Indian and Chinese residents at the census tract level, the zip code that the site falls within is also home to Vietnamese, Korean, and Filipino residents. The diversity of the site lends itself to a wide array of languages that are spoken in AsiaTown. Of those living in the census tract, 65% speak only English and 20% speak in Asian and Pacific Island language. I also looked at the English language proficiency of those who do not only speak English and found that of those who speak in Asian and Pacific Island language, only about 16% speak English well. Next, I looked at economic focus data. At the census tract level, about 35% of the population had an annual income that fell below the poverty level. The median household income of the census tract is about $25,000. To put this in perspective, the median household income at the state level in 2019 was about $58,000. Almost exactly half of residents spend at least 30% of their income to rent each month. Now looking at the employment inflow outflow, we can see that 4,500 people live outside of the census tract but have a job within it, and about 560 live within it but have a job outside of it. Only 39 people both live and are employed within the census tract. Finally, I used NeoCando data to collect safety statistics at the census tract level, as well as the neighborhood that the site falls within and of the city of Cleveland. We can see that both types of crimes are the highest at the census tract level. To accommodate for these safety concerns, it would be beneficial to collaborate with the adjacent 3rd District Police Station.
Finally, Sarah Hammer will discuss the identified SWOTs, which are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Thank you, Tyler. As mentioned, I will be going over the SWOT analysis. We will start out with the current strengths, which there are many. AsiaTown Cleveland is part of Midtown Community Development Corporation, and they have been playing an active role in the neighborhood. They've built the foundation of trust with the residents, and they've also been beneficial to our project with background information, insights into the community, answering questions that we have had. They are a great partner to have with future developments. Another strength is that AsiaTown doesn't have to figure out its identity and branding. This community is very rooted in its culture and its values, and these values should be leveraged to continue to build a welcoming, diverse neighborhood. The next strength is the location. The site is adjacent to CSU and downtown. University Circle is only about 3 miles away, and with direct access to the freeway, it's easy to get around to other parts of the city. In this small area, there is a robust amount of unique restaurant and dining options. In the quarter mile surrounding the site, there are 6 markets and 24 restaurants. So now we'll move on to the weaknesses. There are no green spaces or parks for residents. As identified earlier, there are many impervious surfaces in the site area, so finding a green space is going to be a challenge. A topic you'll be hearing about often is the current state of the sidewalks and other infrastructures. The streets are not safe and easy to cross, and the sidewalks are in disrepair. The last weakness is that harsh juxtaposition of the industrial to residential zoning. It's a challenge to plan for a residential neighborhood while contending with industrial uses such as large truck traffic. There are plenty of opportunities though for placemaking, like wayfinding and street art, to build on the cultural identity of the neighborhood. Partnering with local businesses can also help to enhance the streetscape by just having them add signages or planters, and that also gives ownership to the neighborhood. There are available sites for new development, so it's not like we're looking for an empty site. And the proximity to large institutions such as CSU can provide unique partnership opportunities. So the last section I'll talk about is the threats. The cleanup of any environmental issue has the potential to run up costs significantly, and you never really know the extent until you start, which leads to the next threat of the financing of the project. We have big recommendations and it will require complex financing, and there's always the threat that you don't get the financing that you need. The last threat I would like to address is the inability to gain the trust of the residents. You should really want current residents to believe in your project, and to truly have a successful development, you need to have their buy-in.
Beyond the existing conditions, we also conducted a literature review. I'll hand it over to Rachel Remenschneider to talk about that some more.
Thank you, Tyler. One of the key elements that we looked at as part of the literature review was facilitating aging in place and aging in community for AsiaTown residents. It's very important to provide seniors with the option to stay close to their families, their friends, and their support systems. They've likely spent years building a life and building their home in this neighborhood, and they shouldn't have to leave just because their needs are changing. And we believe that this community can adapt to better meet those changing needs. So 2 of the main things we looked at were aging in place, which allows seniors to remain independent in their homes that they have lived in for years. And we looked at a couple different ways that this has been done, including universal design to make homes more friendly, accessory dwelling units, which we'll talk about at length later in the presentation, and also options like naturally occurring retirement communities and villages, which connect seniors to existing services or provide new services to help them maintain their independence. An important part of that as well is aging in community, which may mean that seniors have to move out of their home, but they can still remain in the community, and the neighborhood will have to change to make that possible. So while the facility itself can provide for the physical and social needs, the community will also have to make some changes, which we'll discuss in the next slide. So universal design, as I mentioned previously, is part of changing the physical characteristics of a space to make it more accessible for everyone, regardless of their abilities. And that applies to both public spaces, such as the home that you live in, as well as, private spaces, such as the home as you live in, as well as public spaces, such as stores, restaurants, green spaces, sidewalks, etc. The other thing we looked at was the whole person approach, which provides for the physical and mental wellness of community members. And that can be through things like social clubs, health screenings, and exercise classes to make sure that all of their needs are being met. So some modifications that can make a neighborhood more livable, particularly for older individuals, can involve things like adapting streets so that they are safer and making transit more convenient and affordable, as seniors may lose their ability to drive a car and it makes it harder for them to get around on their own. And we can also modify other public spaces so that they're accessible to people with different abilities through things like ramps, places to sit, and again, improving sidewalks and streets. And you'll see some of these in action as we get into our streetscape designs later in the presentation. And then the last thing that we looked at was the idea of cultural placemaking, which is important to highlight the characteristics that make the community unique by building on local history and the cultural influences while expanding on old and developing new traditions that invite and engage the broader public. This will involve using elements of Asian culture to unify the neighborhood. It will enhance the sense of community, celebrate the history of the neighborhood, and make AsiaTown more of a destination and less of a place that you drive through just to get to downtown.
Thanks, Rachel. We also knew that effective plans seek public engagement. To talk about that process, I'm going to give it back to Courtney and Sarah.
So public engagement is one of the most important aspects in developing any plan. To do this, we sought public input using both an online community survey as well as conducting interviews with those we identified as key stakeholders. Unfortunately, COVID kept us from following in the footsteps of past studio capstones, where they would go out and conduct the community survey at locations in the site. To accommodate for being fully online, we set up 2 display stands, one at Asia Plaza and one at the CSU Student Center, and distributed small postcard-sized handouts with the survey link on them at multiple businesses in AsiaTown. Though we did not get as many responses as we would have liked, the feedback we did get was valuable in helping us shape our final recommendations. For example, when asked what amenities they would like to see in AsiaTown, most responses indicated that they would like to see a green space and a community center. When asked what would make it easier to navigate AsiaTown, most said improved lighting, landscaping, and just to see an increase in activity in the neighborhood. We also asked where respondents would like to live as they age. Most indicated that they would like to live with family, and some said in a senior living facility. Of those who said some other location, a couple said that they hadn't given it much thought, while some simply said they would like to live in a walkable neighborhood. The main takeaways of this survey are that the people who live and visit AsiaTown want to have dedicated spaces where they can have physical activity and where they can meet to gather and socialize. By making these spaces and by doing things like enhancing lighting and improving walkability, we can meet the needs of these residents, all while improving the perception of safety.
With limited survey results, the stakeholder interviews that were conducted were relied on heavily in the planning of this project. The stakeholders that were identified included community development corporations, community advocates, city employees, council persons, nonprofits, and local businesses. A total of 10 interviews were conducted over the phone or Zoom due to the COVID restrictions that Courtney mentioned earlier. These interviews were up to an hour long, which provided us an opportunity to ask more in-depth questions to supplement the online survey. Our goal was to gain insights on their views on the strengths and weaknesses of the site and the community as a whole, and their vision for the future of AsiaTown. The stakeholders recognize that there has been an increase in retail and specialty stores, but most of the new development that has been happening is in the downtown CSU and Midtown areas, not directly in AsiaTown. With the Dave's relocation leaving such a large void in the community, we thought it was important to specifically address with the stakeholders. When asked about possible future uses for the vacant space, a hardware home goods store, a library, or a farmer's market were suggested. But 6 of the 10 stakeholders said that the site should be turned into a centralized space for all community centers in the neighborhood. Another key takeaway is that neighborhood walkability needs to be improved. 4 of the 10 stakeholders specifically stated that the neighborhood is not currently walkable, and another 2 had just listed out the reasons of why it's not walkable. The next most discussed issue is the current lack of placemaking, business signage, and public gathering spaces. But these were also listed as opportunities to leverage the greatest asset that's identified as their strong sense of community and culture. 2 of the stakeholders stated that AsiaTown has a unique opportunity to develop a clear identity of a residential neighborhood that is welcoming to all. Half of the stakeholders discussed that businesses intentionally don't advertise as a means to reduce break-ins. The current residents have an inward focus and tend to police themselves, and this can tend to make them a target for crimes though. It was also stated that the increase in tourism through new development could add strain of the current residents, furthering their unwillingness to let others in. 2 stakeholders said a way to bridge this divide is to enhance the communication of existing services and programs and increase community activism. 1 stakeholder would like to see Asian representation on city council. All of the stakeholders believe that CSU should be more engaged with AsiaTown. 3 stakeholders mentioned CSU could facilitate the physical connections by sidewalk repairs and to help find a solution to improve the safety of crossing the I-90 freeway. 1 suggested CSU provide transportation to and from campus. There are also programmatic changes suggested, increased promotion of AsiaTown to students and cross-cultural classes. And there was a suggestion to have a program for international students to help adjust to life in the US. The last topic that we addressed was on housing. All of the stakeholders stated that there is not enough diverse housing options currently in AsiaTown. 3 of the stakeholders mentioned the Mueller Lofts industrial conversion and really wanted to see something very similar to that. 2 of the stakeholders discussed how there is no current mortgage market in the neighborhood, which makes it difficult to find comparables for appraisals. And 4 of the stakeholders stated that there needs to be a mix of market rate and low income housing options. Several of the stakeholder interviews were so in depth that time ran out before they got to address every topic. So we would just like to thank again the stakeholders for their time and their feedback.
Thanks. Now, Malcolm, Ian, Ariel, and Sarah were tasked with doing some market analysis in order to shape our plan. To further discuss the market analysis will be Malcolm, Ian, and Ariel.
Thank you, Tyler. So we conducted this market analysis with an eye towards determining the products and services that were missing from the study area and the surrounding communities. So our first step was do a multifamily analysis. The first step in that was to delineate a primary market area. We chose a 10-minute drive during normal driving conditions as a reasonable area to draw our tenants from. And there was a small amount of secondary demand considered as well. So we ran an inventory of all of our competitors. These would be 4- and 5-star multifamily houses, the new builds. Overall in our primary market area, there are 57 buildings. 2 things to consider from this would be the 659 units currently under construction. It is a very active market. And then the current vacancy at 23.3%. Now this is definitely a function of 1, the amount of the boom in construction, but also the COVID pandemic. And so it should be noted that CoStar sees this figure normalizing the next 4 to 5 years when things start to die down again. The next step in the multifamily was to run a housing niche analysis. You'll see the results, a selection of the results on the right. So how this was created was we took the inputs of household incomes in the primary market area, the owner-occupied housing values, all the rents paid, and all the current vacancies. And we kind of processed that information using a 3 times their yearly income as the affordable housing range, and a 30% of the monthly income as their rent affordability range. Processing that data, you'll see that it's overbuilt in the lower price ranges. You won't see the whole selection in this, but if you were to follow the chart up past this selection, it's very overbuilt in the lower price range. But we do have a nice chunk in the green bands in which we can select our project from. Looking at those green bands, which are the bands that compare with the average prices of our competitors, you can see we can get about 4,000 units of net demand are needed with a 10% project capture rate. It looks about 400 units or so that we can look to absorb on any projects in our study area. The next area of analysis was senior housing. We inventoried all the 3- and 4-star senior housing. Again, there are no 5 stars, but these would be the nice buildings. They were newer builds at one time. There are 21 buildings in our study area. 2 things to focus on in this one would be the no units under construction and none planned in the near future. And the current vacancy at 4.7%, which was it's a historical low, and it was not affected by the COVID pandemic. The last thing to consider on this page would be that 19 of our 21 competitors are affordable housing, which would match with the lower income in the primary market area for senior citizens. Now we wanted to kind of extract demand. 2 things to consider, or a few things to consider. First would be that overall, the primary market area is expected to increase in both the total number of senior citizens and the percentage of the population in the next 5 years. And then we did a little demand estimate using the different factors of the actual vacancy versus historical vacancy, the actual construction versus historical construction, and what's expected to be needed, net absorption versus what is expected to be demolished. Filtering all that information through the equation, we get 121 units needed in our primary market area yearly. Extrapolating that out for 3 years and taking a 30% capture for our project, which is pretty conservative, we should be able to absorb 109 units in our senior housing project.
With the site area so close to CSU, we also wanted to take a look at student housing supply and demand. So we started out by inventorying all housing within a half-mile radius of CSU, and then filtering that down by student exclusive housing, student focused housing, and then non-student housing. Taking out dorms and student only housing, we had about 10,046 beds available in the area, which when factored down by a 50% capture for student focused housing units and then a 15% for non-student housing, gave us a total bed count for the CSU of about 3,959 beds. So then taking that number into demand, we looked at enrollment numbers for CSU. Currently, CSU has an enrollment of about 16,106 students, and assuming about 25% of those students would like to live on or near campus, which is on par with peer institutions, you get a demand for about 4,027 beds. During the work on this market analysis, also CSU announced the 2.0 plan, which set a goal for adding about 4,500 new students by 2025. So the same thing was done with about 103 beds. And then subtracting that out, there's currently a gap of about 68 beds for students on site, but then projected for 2025, that gap will increase to about 1,194 beds.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending. Our intergenerational analysis, we looked at the current intergenerational housing makeup versus the introduction of a new concept of intergenerational housing. Currently, intergenerational housing in Greater Cleveland are seniors 50 and above that are living with younger relatives. Examples are grandchildren that they have guardianship over. And the new intergenerational housing that we want to implement is seniors, those same age seniors, living with college students. They would have their own separate areas, but they would live amongst younger or more mature college students. And There's a variation of housing options to be desired to be introduced to the community. Through the community surveys, a lot of residents expressed that the community needs a variety of housing to create connectivity and new housing stock. This will also increase comparable housing options in the area. With the introduction of intergenerational housing, the community will now have more diverse housing options and activity in the area. So this is something that would be new to Greater Cleveland, something new to the AsiaTown community, which will be very exciting for the residents and the surrounding city. Next slide.
So along with housing, we also looked at the retail market for the area. So that, again, like the housing analysis, began with defining a retail primary market. So to do so, we took note of the absence of the Dave's supermarket that used to exist in the area. And we decided that we would look at surrounding grocery stores to determine what the market area would be. So taking that, we used Dave's Market, the new version over on Chester, Save a Lot on Superior, and then Heinen's downtown as our comparables. And then based on that, we performed a gravity model analysis and then adjusted the boundaries based on road linkages and perceived boundaries such as I-77 or I-90. With that retail primary market area defined, we could look at the supply and the demand numbers. So for supply, we looked at an inventory of all first floor retail within the primary market area, which came to a total of about 1.45 million square feet, which we then categorized based on retail type and use. And then for demand, we looked at the number of households in the area, which is about 4,828. And then taking that, we looked at the average income of 35,000. Due to the fact that a lot of the income in the area is lower, we applied a low income multiplier based on median income, which we came to about 86% of their income, which accounts for non-employment income in the area. And then taking that and adding that into the PMA income based on households, we got a total household income of 319 million. And then finally, to get the total spending power, we took the workers in the area and their average income and multiplied it by an estimated amount of time spent within the site area. In conclusion, the total PMA spending power is about 428 million. So finally, we conducted a retail niche analysis, which takes your spending power and works that out based on potential sales of each type of store or retail category use. And that gave us a supportable square footage number for each use. So based on our results, we found that some underserved retail uses were women's clothing stores, jewelry stores, optical goods stores, among other specialty stores. There is room for a grocery or supermarket on site. And there's also room for a community or recreation center on site based on these results.
So our final area of the market analysis involved office space, and specifically Class B office space. So taking a look at the Midtown market area or sub-market area, which is, we have a contraction of around 4.3% over the last 12 years, along with a decrease of about 50% in the vacancy. Now, it should be noted that vacancy has been below 10% for the last 5 years, and that's generally an indicator of it's time to build stuff. And when you look at going forward into the future, the anticipated net absorption versus what is anticipated to be construction, there is a gap in that as well. And then the third factor, if you look at the overall employment outlook of the Cleveland market, you'll see that there's an expected increase in the next 5 years in both financial activities and professional and business services, two things that utilize office space. So taking all these factors into consideration, we believe that a 12,000 to 15,000 square feet of office space would be an appropriate number for this project as a whole.
Now that we have a better understanding of the market in the area, we identified some separate corridors for specific development plans within the site. The first corridor identified was that along Payne Avenue. Isabella is going to begin that discussion.
So looking very generally at Payne, we're recommending infill development of multifamily and commercial spaces along that, we want those spaces to align with the identified uses supported by our market analysis that was just discussed. Beyond infill development, we are encouraging adaptive reuse when feasible of architecturally significant buildings. Our vision sees Payne Avenue further developing into a strong commercial corridor for the area that effectively connects over I-90 to the northeastern edge of Cleveland State's campus.
Now Fulton will be discussing our proposed zoning changes here.
So we are proposing a zoning change to implement an urban urban form overlay. This will promote a high level of walkability and design quality for streets. It requires pedestrian oriented building facades. This also preserves and enhances the architectural character of both existing buildings and new buildings that may be built over time. It limits conflicts between cars and pedestrians, making it safer and more walkable for pedestrians. And finally, it will reduce the parking requirements for new development.
And now David Bass is going to discuss some streetscaping improvements.
Thanks, Tyler. So to connect our streetscape plans to our project goals, our primary objective is to ensure that the neighborhood adheres to the principles of universal design and is therefore accessible to people of all ages, as well as all modes of transportation. The primary survey needs for the Payne Avenue corridor include improved lighting, transportation safety and cleanliness, repaired sidewalks, increased perception of safety, and more seating, park space, and shade trees. As far as existing plans go, the People Streets is an organization currently working on addressing these surveyed needs through interim design improvements. They intend to enhance the streetscape experience as soon as possible and to test out ideas for permanent installation during the upcoming Payne Avenue resurfacing project scheduled by the city for construction in 2023 or 2024. So given all of that, our plan is to assist the People Streets with interim streetscape design plans and implementation strategies, and to propose a reconstructed streetscape plan for the city's consideration. So in taking a look at the existing streetscape, we can see a number of problems along the corridor. First, the number of lanes greatly exceeds demand. There's currently a little over 6,000 vehicles per day that use Payne Avenue. However, its current lane configuration has the capacity for approximately 25,000 vehicles per day. Additionally, the lane configuration of 2 lanes in each direction with no turn lanes creates a dangerous traffic pattern that encourages cars to weave around turning vehicles. Based on site visits, it appears that available parking exceeds demand in most locations. Bus stops are generally nothing but a small sign and are unwelcoming and nondescript. There's very minimal seating throughout the corridor. There are large sections with no landscaping at all, and where there is green space, it's generally underutilized. So our interim redesign work actually went into action earlier this semester as we collaborated with the People Streets. We provided graphics for a proposed intergenerational pocket park shown to the right here, and bus stop improvements along Payne, shown on the next slide, as part of an AARP Community Challenge Grant application. In addition to what was worked on with the People Streets, we've also identified locations for landscaping features such as temporary planters, parklets, and benches, along with potential locations for street art, including murals and sculptures. Lastly, we've also developed a potential interim road diet configuration, reducing the number of lanes, adding bike lanes, painted crosswalks, and pedestrian bump outs. So here we can see the images produced for the bus stop redesign for the AARP Community Challenge Grant application. And they just show how relatively inexpensive materials such as pallets, plants, and paint can greatly improve the condition of a streetscape over the interim term. And here we show our interim redesign plan for the western portion of Payne. This shows a revised lane configuration with bike lanes to improve accessibility for all modes of transportation. painted crosswalks and bump outs to shorten the distance of crossing the street, thereby improving pedestrian safety, potential mural and sculpture locations to liven up the corridor and create a more distinct sense of place. And there are opportunities for planters, parklets, and benches shown to increase green space and seating opportunities, as well as to provide the opportunity for more eyes to be on the street, helping to increase a perception of safety along the corridor. In the report, we have also included a cost estimate for all of these interim improvements over the half-mile corridor area, which comes to approximately $70,000. As much or as little as that can be spent as feasible. We've also identified implementation strategies, including the use of NOACA's Street Supplies program, which permits access to a library of interim streetscape supplies and provides design assistance and interim construction planning services. And we've also identified other funding sources that can help close the gap on the projected cost. Moving on to the reconstructed design, this largely consists of making the interim design improvements permanent, including the permanent striping of the roadway diet configuration, installation of concrete curb ramp bump outs, and installation of benches fastened to the ground. Additionally, we've identified landscaping improvement areas, which include the addition of bioswales, tree lawns, and street trees to increase the pervious surface on the corridor and to reduce the roadway width without requiring the reconstruction of the current stormwater drainage system. We've also identified further street art and wayfinding signage locations, along with locations where sidewalk slabs need reconstruction and where supplemental lighting is needed. The total cost of these improvements, as we've estimated, comes to approximately $2 million, putting it in line with comparable capital improvement roadway projects the city of Cleveland is currently undertaking, such as along West 65th and Franklin Boulevard. So we believe that this redesign is relatively feasible.
Thanks. The second corridor is that along Perkins, where we'll go back to Isabella.
So looking generally at Perkins Avenue, this is between East 30th and East 36th Street. This corridor is currently home to a mix of industry, office buildings, and some residences. In order to increase public health conditions as well as safety for our residents, our vision phases out the industrial uses in favor of a mix of mixed-use multifamily and commercial spaces. Similar to Payne, we are prioritizing infill development and recommend adaptive reuse for a handful of older, more architecturally significant properties that are scattered through the corridor. We envision Perkins growing into a residential commercial corridor that will serve as a more pedestrian-friendly and focused connection through the area.
Thanks. We also have a proposed zoning change here as well. Along this area, we are proposing to utilize the urban core overlay through the city of Cleveland, highlighted in blue on the map. This will allow for a more dense, mixed-use development with a focus on the kind of pedestrian access we envision along Perkins and up along East 30th. This overlay focuses on dense mixed use that highlights pedestrian access and building features and also eliminates parking requirements so that developers are afforded more flexibility. In the future, though, we recommend the entire site to implement a form-based zoning code based on the current pilot projects taking place in Cleveland. From here, David is going to discuss the streetscaping improvements along Perkins.
Thanks, Tyler. So yeah, as Isabella mentioned, the goal for Perkins is to transition it away from being a small street that has to deal with large trucks to being a nice walkable roadway for a residential neighborhood. So the proposed improvements here include the striping of 2 travel lanes and 2 bike lanes, curb ramp bump outs across the one-way residential streets heading towards Payne, new pocket park space at the southwest corner of Perkins and East 33rd Street, and a continuous sidewalk at the East 32nd Street intersection in front of the proposed mixed-use grocery store site. So to explain the continuous sidewalk idea a little bit, unlike a regular crosswalk where pedestrians must enter a roadway space that's clearly designed for vehicle traffic, A continuous sidewalk provides the opposite experience, where cars must enter a clearly defined and elevated pedestrian space to pass through the intersection. The purpose of this proposal is to dramatically improve the pedestrian access and safety for neighborhood residents of all ages in accessing the proposed mixed-use grocery store development, and to deter cut-through traffic along Perkins and encourage vehicles to come to the neighborhood and visit our Catalyst sites by way of Chester Avenue.
Great. And now I'm going to hand it off to Jamisha to talk about the residential area in the site.
Better known as an ADU or a granny flat, an accessory dwelling unit is a secondary housing unit on a single-family lot. ADUs are not only a great way to add additional living space, but they can also provide significant benefits and future investments. ADUs can come either attached, detached, or can be internally, such as in the attic or basement areas. You can go to the next slide. For examples, these images show the floor plan of a 446 square foot unit, which is equivalent to a studio apartment. And the picture to the right is a floor plan of a 793 square foot, which is equivalent to a 1-bedroom unit. ADUs can also come in a 2-bedroom format. The benefits of accessory dwelling units, that they are cheaper to construct. They create opportunities to diversify affordable housing options. It provides the senior citizens the option to remain in their communities. It can be also used as office space for home-based businesses, or can also be used as supplemental rental income for homeowners. According to the City of Cleveland's zoning code, an ADU must be in the rear half of the lot, cannot exceed 800 square feet. The maximum height allowed is 15 feet. Constructing, adding an ADU to an existing property may require variance or conditional use permit pending the approval from the Building and Housing Department, Board of Zoning Appeals, and the City of Cleveland Planning Commission. Currently within our Sterling area, there are already, as you can see in the picture, they are ADUs within our area. We are hoping the changes to the zoning code will allow for a less tedious process for future development of these units. I'd like to introduce you to the next wave or the future of infield and single-family housing units. These are 3D printed houses. They're kind of still within their infancy stages. 3D houses are quickly growing as the next wave in affordable housing infill strategies, and can boom in the construction industry within the next 5 to 10 years. As you can see in the picture to the right, there's a company in Austin, Texas called Icon. They constructed these homes with a nonprofit as a way to build a community for the homeless population. So far, these 3D printed homes have demonstrated that they are more energy efficient and sustainable than traditional homes. Additionally, these homes are also cost effective. 600 square foot home can cost around within the $10,000 range. They are also eco-friendly, which uses renewable resources such as bioplastics, and can eliminate the unnecessary construction waste. They can also be customized to fit the neighborhood's existing fabric. These homes can be produced at a faster rate. You can build one of these homes within 24 hours versus 6 to 7 months traditionally. We will hope this will create a new trend in affordable housing options within the city and its surrounding neighborhoods. As you can see in these pictures in this slide right here, these are examples of ADUs. Like I said, they're just like basically tiny homes. Everything is like on one level. You can have like a more traditional build, or as you can see in the middle picture is more like a California style home. And the far right picture is the interior of an ADU, which is more like a studio. This one picture is like a studio apartment.
Thanks, Jamisha. In terms of development plans, we have identified several of what we call catalyst sites that we hope will spur growth in the site. Here you can see those highlighted projects in red. Beginning in the southeast corner, we have 2 proposed projects. Using the highest and best use analysis for our development site along Chester, some of the identified uses include senior housing, mixed-use commercial and residential, and park and public spaces. These findings align with our plans. First, Fulton will discuss the intergenerational housing facility we have proposed.
Thank you, Tyler. So this development will be a 4-story intergenerational housing complex. The first 3 floors will be for seniors and the top floor will be for CSU students, which is done because both college students and seniors are both suffer from isolation and limited income. So this is a great way to have them intertwine with each other. This will also allow for seniors to have the opportunity to age in community, which we discussed about earlier. To the north of this development we are proposing a community garden, which will be easily accessible for residents due to these proposed streetscapes. And finally, directly to the west of this development is a pocket park that residents will be able to enjoy. So for the implementation aspect of this, due to one of our clients, North Coast Commercial, owning the parcels, we do not need to worry about how we will gain access to these parcels to build this site. As Ariel mentioned earlier, this will be a first intergenerational housing site in Cleveland that has both students and seniors living together in the same development. Due to that, it can be a great marketing tool to bring attention to both AsiaTown, CSU, and this new site that we are proposing. This can also be a catalyst for more intergenerational housing to be like this around Cleveland. And the partnerships include Cleveland State, which will provide the students the opportunity to live here, North Coast Commercial, who's the owner of the parcels where this will be built, to help find a developer, and then finally Midtown Cleveland to help promote this as an intergenerational housing site in Cleveland, the first one, and also recommending residents to move here who want to stay in the community. And then finally, the total cost will be around $29 million to build this development, and there's some different funding options, such as utilizing low-income housing tax credits, the home loans, the OWA Green Infrastructure Loan, the Cleveland Foundation Grant, and finally, tax abatements.
Thank you, Fulton. Along with the findings that a mixed use would work here, we proposed a mixed use development with first floor grocery and floors 2, 3, and 4 being residential. There's a dedicated green space that transitions between this development and the intergenerational housing to help make up for that lack of green space in the area. This grocery is to help make up for the absence of Dave's Market. This project amounts to a $24 million project, but shows promising income. Some of the identified funding sources include new market tax credits, low interest green infrastructure loans, and tax abatements. As a small scale urban grocery, the focus is being on pedestrian friendly, with primary access along Perkins and parking and loading being handled from Chester. Residential units are market rate to help create a greater variety of housing stock and choice in the area. Next, we turn north to a proposed community center Rachel will be presenting on.
Thank you, Tyler. So as Tyler mentioned, our next Catalyst project is the Community Center, which we heard over and over again during our stakeholder interviews and our background research that this was something missing from the neighborhood. You can see here from the highest and best use analysis that it scored higher than a lot of the other uses we looked at, as well as office, which is another use that we will put on this site. So the site that we're looking at is currently a CMSD school. It's the Design Lab and Early College School, and it will be phased out by CMSD in the coming years. The reason that we chose this site in particular for the community center is that the first floor already has a lot of the things that we think a community center could use, including a gym that will provide space for indoor recreation and large group meetings, and classrooms for smaller events, and that there are opportunities both inside and out for art exhibits and murals, that can help, celebrate some of that Asian culture. Again, our idea for the second floor is that it will be for office space, primarily for nonprofits that will provide services for the residents. And the second part of this Catalyst project is a large green space, 1.2 acres on the adjacent lot that is just to the west of the community center. The green space was another common request from residents and the stakeholders, and it will act as the central park space for the neighborhood. Some of the amenities that it might include could be things like adequate lighting for safety, accessible and well-maintained paths so that everyone who wants to come can access the park, a small covered pavilion, open space for group exercises, and a playground for the neighborhood children. So a few things will need to happen for the implementation of this project. As Fulton mentioned earlier, it will be part of the urban form overlay zoning change. There will have to be a renovation in the school to transfer it into the community center and the office spaces, and the green space will require some demolition of a few industrial buildings that are there currently, as well as the site preparation for the park itself. Altogether, that comes to about $9.5 million, and that will be funded by things like nonprofit tax-exempt bonds, new market tax credits, philanthropy, and grants.
Thanks. And finally, going west, our last Catalyst site is a proposed mixed-use retail site. Here to talk about that is Matt Rea.
Thanks, Tyler. So for this site, we performed another highest and best use analysis, and by far we found that some form of mixed-use commercial retail site would be most appropriate for this location. So what we're proposing here is sort of taking this whole block and turning it into one big site with about 40,000 square feet of retail and office space on the ground floor and an additional 130,000 square foot of leasable residential on the floors above. The structure of the buildings, we believe, could be centered around a green community space for residents to interact with, not only from this project, but from the community as a whole. We could connect this green space across East 30th to the green space next to the community center. And we think this would be a great spot to promote things like placemaking and branding, and also wayfinding for AsiaTown, with possible murals on the front-facing public facade and programmed public space usage with the green courtyard in the middle. So the funding for the site will mostly be done through a developer. We'll have the parcels, we'll buy them and condense them all into one thing for someone to buy, and then they can buy it, build it under the conditions that the use that we're defining for the site is met upon construction. And we think this can be done with just a few partners using Midtown Cleveland for stuff like branding, and the Urban League of Greater Cleveland and Greater Cleveland Neighborhood Centers Association for the Green Space Center in the middle to really promote that as a neighborhood area. In terms of implementation, we would need to start off with demolition of all the existing structures on the site, as well as the northern parking lot that currently exists, and then combining the parcels of land that are there. There is some reuse that we could do with what's here, namely a parking lot to the south of the site that we can use for the residents that are going to be living above the retail space. And then we also believe that wayfinding and branding are essential at this site. It's one of the first things you're going to see coming into AsiaTown from downtown, right across the bridge on Payne. So we believe that using the front facing of the building for some kind of mural may be done through the Progressive Arts Alliance or Asia Services and Action organization would be just the perfect kind of entrance way to the larger area of AsiaTown. In terms of the finances, it is kind of an expensive project. It will cost about $40 million to do total, but it has a decent operating income of about $2 million. But we believe that we can help with some of these costs by utilizing things like the new market tax credits, brownfield grants, green infrastructure loans, and also offering tax abatements to developers.
Great. And our final proposed changes include some transit and transportation plans. Isabella will discuss those transit plans.
So we've identified a location at the intersection of East 27th Street and Payne that could be developed in the future into a parking garage, depending on the area's parking needs as these development projects happen. The site is currently an abandoned auto garage that's adjacent to an overflow surface parking lot owned and used by Asia Plaza. In the meantime, we envision the auto garage portion becoming a transit stop. So the number 38 bus line that runs up and down Payne Avenue currently does not have a published stop in AsiaTown, and this could serve as a good location for adding that. Further, we're proposing a circulator shuttle for the area that I'll detail in a minute that could use this site as a home base, such as where the shuttles are stored and where they begin and end their route. So in order to increase access to public transit in the area, as well as access to the rest of AsiaTown and Midtown in general, we're proposing the addition of a circulator shuttle. Examples in Cleveland that prompted this idea include University Circle's CircleLink shuttle and the RTA downtown trolley service, both of which serve as free circulator transportation in those respective areas. In terms of potential partners, we really looked to our other Cleveland examples. We see Cleveland State as the most important partner. This would be akin to CircleLink's partnership with Case Western, because we see students really using this as well as residents using it to connect and get to Cleveland State. Beyond CSU, we see the local community development corporations, government organizations, and area corporate sponsors as potential partners, as their employees and customers will likely be shuttle users. For the funding mechanism, we think it's important for the shuttle to be free. In talking with those other, the operators of our other Cleveland examples, they say they're free so that use is maximized, and also because there are additional costs and security concerns associated with having the bus driver needing to collect fares. Costs widely vary across the shuttle examples, both in Cleveland and ones we found nationally. There would likely be an upfront cost of the shuttles themselves and then annual operating costs. But upfront costs could be minimized or avoided by contracting with an operator, such as standard parking. So this map shows our proposed route of the circulator in the green dashed line. The colorful lines are the other RTA bus routes through the area. So as you can see, the circulator would really connect a lot of these public transit routes. It would go from Cleveland State University on East 22nd Street, up Chester to Dave's Market, then up 55th and back down Superior over to Asia Plaza at Payne and East 30th. We would propose a frequency of every 15 to 30 minutes, depending on the time of day, and think that weekday and weekend service would be important, given that this wouldn't just be used by commuters, but also to get to restaurants and do shopping. So the goal here, again, is to improve connectivity to CSU and within AsiaTown, and then also up to Dave's Market and other parts of Midtown. This also supports the concept of aging in place by offering a way for seniors to get around the area.
And finally, David will talk about how our plans promote the circulation to and within the site.
Thanks, Tyler. Yeah, so as the name of our project suggests, our overall plan is to improve access within the neighborhood itself and between the neighborhood and its surrounding neighborhoods. We hope that through our streetscaping plans, we help to provide better access for everyone within the neighborhood to access the services that they need. And we hope with the catalyst sites that people are drawn in from the city to enjoy what AsiaTown has to offer.
Thanks, everybody. At this point, I'd like to take the time to share some acknowledgements, because without these groups and people, this plan would not be what it is. We'd first like to thank our project sponsors, the AIA Cleveland Chapter Community on Aging, North Coast Commercial, and Midtown Cleveland. We'd like to extend a special thanks to guest speakers that have helped us in class. And additionally, we need to thank our translators that have helped us to translate the survey and other work. Finally, the entire class would like to thank our professors, James Kostelik and Dr. Tom Hildy, for their guidance, insight, and help. At this time, I'd like to open up to questions and comments. I'll begin by reviewing the chat box to see if there are any questions, and then I'll be going to participants. If you have a question, you should be able to use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and I will come around to address that. Okay, we have one comment, but it doesn't look like we have any questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. We have one question in the chat now. How close is this site to major healthcare facilities? So one of our goals, promoting that access, we wanted to get people to the Healthline, but Chester Avenue is a huge hurdle for people who don't have access to a vehicle. So we hope, improvements like the circulator shuttle and walkability within the area will get people to that Healthline. Can anyone comment to health facilities in the area without specifically Cleveland Clinic? Okay, it looks like someone else is having a difficult time raising their hand too. So if anyone wants to put their chats in. Another question, my comments are that I'm very intrigued by the zoning recommendations around urban overlay and ADU. Yeah, so we really like the idea of the urban overlays, both the form and core overlay. Oh, Joyce, I can go straight to you then.
Oh, thanks. Actually, finish your thought about the zoning changes.
So we like the fact that it was already built into the Cleveland code. So we didn't need to rewrite a code or rework anything. The idea is that it kind of sets principles for how buildings should be designed and how they should look. It's kind of that beginning step to that form-based code, but it doesn't require getting rid of the existing codes. The way that it's worded though, it says that if there's any kind of disagreement between the existing Euclidean style codes and the form-based code actually wins out. So this was just a first step into trying to get to those kinds of codes.
Gotcha. And I actually also have a question regarding Perkins. So I saw your new proposed streetscape for Perkins, as well as some of the uses along there. And I am curious, I think it's wonderful in an ideal world. I think we struggle because there's so many industrial users there that are not likely going to move in the next maybe 5 to 10 years, lots of trucking. And then even industrial user further down on Perkins already bought the accordion building and is going to convert that into some sort of industrial space. So we have like a very real struggle around that. So I'm curious, how you were thinking about kind of making that transition on Perkins with those industrial users. And if not, how to sort of reconcile that conflict.
Would anyone else like to take this question? I mean, the goal is ultimately phasing out some of those industrial uses, specifically those warehousing uses that have heavy truck traffic. But, that's obviously a big concern because industry isn't declining in the area.
Yeah, I think that's a $1 million question. I think, through proposing our zoning recommendations with the urban form overlay, that's designed to decrease industrial use. Also, one of the North Coast Commercial that we worked with owns the Copy King site, and just trying to work with those site owners in the area to try to get the industry moved elsewhere. But yeah, in terms of concrete ways to force industry out, I wouldn't say that we have clear recommendations in that realm, but that would be the goal of our project.
So thank you so much for the question, Joyce. Another question we have, it was mentioned that we have 109 demand for site-specific senior housing. What was the specific site number for student housing? Could I
So
hand it?
on that site was the intergenerational site, it was planned for 45 units of student housing. Now, as noted by Ian, we perceive the demand to be much larger. We also see some of the students that scattering amongst our other market rate facilities. But as far as a specific number, we did not identify one specific to student. We just knew that we could utilize that number in supplementing what we already established as the multifamily demand.
And then to stay on Malcolm, another question said, this would be a good effort to make the neighborhood more livable. Did you estimate the number of trees that would need to be planted, and what % canopy were you hoping to achieve? Could you reach that goal with trees on public spaces, or would you need to encourage planting on private spaces?
So I don't think I dug deep enough to give you an exact number of the trees that would need to be planted. I think the data is fuzzy when it comes to how many we would need to achieve the mitigation to build on the specifically that large Park Vista site. They gave very specific recommendations in the literature about what kinds of trees to plant, but I don't know if we know how much needs to be planted to mitigate that. As far as the overall canopy goals, I think we want to align ourselves with the city of Cleveland's goals. That's why I listed those. I think 30% is an ambitious goal. I think it would probably take, but I think we do have a lot of opportunity to utilize these large parking lots and large industrial spaces. And then the conversion of those will give us a lot of our space to implement the tree plantings that we need. But as far as a specific number, I did not come up with that.
Another question, do you have alternate ideas for retail/office space if there isn't as much demand as predicted? Maybe special events, community activities, local artist showcase, etc.? Maybe anyone from market analysis?
No, I think that is exactly what we were thinking. And I think, as Rachel mentioned, we see this site as a community asset, not necessarily as a revenue generator. This is something that'll be a community asset run by a nonprofit with a lot of flexibility in what can be provided as far as programming. We don't want to overtake the Sterling Rec Center. We know that's getting renovated, and we know that provides a lot of good services to the community. But as far as arts and culture, and specifically especially local artist showcase, something I think is a great idea for utilizing that space. There's a large center room that would be great for displaying stuff like that in the existing building.
Another question, what elements of your final plan do you think are different because of COVID? What did you have to think about differently? I know that we had to make a lot of assumptions about how things will go back to the way they are. But ultimately, COVID affects all of this. I know there was an issue with creating, looking at traffic numbers. We had to dig back a little deeper instead of just using the past year's traffic numbers. Anything else from anybody?
I know on the market side, we really took COVID into account with determining kind of future market demand. So we tried to be relatively conservative in what we proposed based on kind of uncertainty, especially in the office market and even the retail market. So COVID kind of played a big role in determining numbers on what we could support in the area, as well as what we gathered from the market analysis study.
Next question. There is not much to mention of schools in the area except for CSU. Schools are important to most neighborhoods. The community center will replace a school. Maybe the community center also serves as some type of K-8 school to attract young families. Has there been conversations about schools in the area? So yeah, schools are definitely important. In terms of the community center site, it's being phased out as a school, so it's not necessarily replacing a school. Did you have any more information to add, Rachel?
No, I think that's right, Tyler, that it's, not that we're replacing it, but that it was being phased out, so it would have been eliminated regardless. But yes, that is a good thought that, and again, perhaps if the office demand isn't as high, that perhaps that could be a use for it, but that would likely require some different funding, or certainly a different type of organization would have to run it if it was going to be operated as a school as well. But maybe some sort of educational support uses could be included in that, like after school programs or things like that might be an option.
The next was a comment. It says, it looks like the grocery store and senior housing have a pedestrian face on the north side and an autofocus face on the south side. I like the park between, reaching south to Chester. The parking garage supports a commercial street, but you would need to consider parking needs to the west, so that parking garage is near the center of the need. The community center is within the block, and I like this too. Yeah, so that was really the focus, especially with our plan to create that pedestrian access on Perkins. We kind of just resolved to the fact that Chester Avenue is very auto-centric, so there wasn't much incentive to make that a pedestrian-focused street when it's not friendly to pedestrians as is. So if we can shift that pedestrian access to Perkins, I think that we can kind of create a hybrid between the two. And then, yeah, I think the parking needs are always a concern. Right now, there are a lot of parking and parking lots in the area for private. So, I mean, there's always potential for more parking uses, but we hope that, you know, the future parking garage and circulator could make up for those lacking parking spots in specific areas. Another question, how might you prioritize your recommendations? Is there a top 5 for the next 2 to 3 years? So I think the catalysts are really like our priority projects. The streetscaping we envisioning happening as well. But I think we always looked at the catalysts as being those kickoff projects. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
Well, I guess if we're prioritizing, I think some of the catalysts are a little bit easier to propose financially and get pushed through. So I know the senior housing is very complex since it's affordable housing. So in the community center is going to take a little work. So maybe those would be the second phase, with the commercial, the grocery, and the mixed use being the first phase of the catalyst projects. If we're just doing it by how easy it'll be to implement these different strategies.
Thank you for those market standpoints as well. Someone else said, it's interesting to think about college students and seniors specifically in this intergenerational housing. Can you share a bit more about other case studies or example of how this works? It strikes me that there are different needs / schedules between these two populations. Yeah, that's true. And then thank you below. Looked like Tommy went ahead and linked some information, but Ariel or anyone from market analysis or who did some literary research, does anyone else want to comment on some of that?
Yes, with intergenerational housing, we did look at some case studies, and one that we based a lot off of is called Tiger Place in Columbia, Missouri. And how it works is that, again, the seniors and the students cohabit the same space, but it also helps with seniors. A lot of people say help to combat loneliness and things like that, to have companionship. Some of these students, again, they're older, more mature, that are sharing the same spaces with these seniors. So they become kind of friends and extended family to them. The seniors help the students and the students help the seniors. So there's a give and take aspect to it. And one of the things with the students living in the same environment, we were proposing that CSU be that school, of course, where the students are living there. The students would get a reduction of the student rents that they pay also. So this would kind of be a break for the students. So again, it's a give and take situation, and it's win-win for the individuals that choose to participate in such a program.
And I just to cap that off, I think you're right. It seems like a striking contrast, but you know, we're just giving more choices in the neighborhood. So I think this may not appeal to everyone, but we think it can appeal to somebody and can really work to strengthen both relationships.
And again, note that there are many case studies around the US, but especially around the world. Of course, we know that out of the country, Asia, Europe, these housing models are very prominent. So when we know it's not new to Cleveland, it's just the way that it's being packaged is new to Cleveland. That's why we say it's exciting and new and vibrant, because it's being packaged in a different way. But these housing models, they do work for seniors and for students.
And Joyce, I was just going to say, I had the same reaction that you did. You know, what if the college students, want to party or are very disruptive? And I think in the models we looked at, the students really self-select. So, if they know that they want to party and have big events, they're not going to choose to live in this environment. And we also felt this would be there could be an interesting cultural connection. Cleveland State has a lot of international students. And that, that could be a nice bridge for students that really miss home.
So if anybody doesn't have anything else to follow up, I know that we're a little bit over 5:30. Anyone has any final thoughts? If not, I would say that we are finishing up. So thanks, everybody.